Right, for more on this, we're joined by Veli Mbele, kaSompisi. He is Afrocentric essayist and co-founder of Mutapa, a think tank that focuses on Afrocentric dialogue and teaching of authentic history. A very good evening to you, Veli. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Perhaps let's just start with the issue of jurisdiction. As you heard from that report, how important is it? And keeping in mind that the judiciary is an arm of the state, and we're talking about a democratic state now.
Yes. Look, there is a legal way, of looking at it. And under the current legal framework, right, no individual, institution, or organization is not subject to the current legal framework, right? And so AfriForum and whatever it is they wish to achieve, will necessarily be subjected to legal scrutiny in terms of the political arrangement that was agreed to since 1994. So that is the understanding, right? That there is an arrangement that has been created since 1994 that individuals, institutions that operate within the territory referred to South Africa will subject themselves to the applicable laws, and AfriForum is no different. But I said to somebody earlier that if we focus only on the legalistic or legal aspects of what is presented to us, I think we will not understand the bigger implications of what is happening, right? And some of it came out in the arguments that were made by Advocate Ngukaitobi. So from our perspective as Mutapa, so the most important thing that we must understand here is that what we are seeing happening through organizations like AfriForum, right, is a reconsolidation of white power and white supremacy in South Africa after 1994. And AfriForum has become the face of the reconsolidation of white power and white supremacy in South Africa. And you can see how emboldened and how arrogant, they are becoming by the day. Just to take you back to show you the threat that
Veli, before you get to that, I want to ask a question, because you mentioned about the crux of the matter. AfriForum is saying earlier on that the fact that it is part of this case, it doesn't necessarily mean that it condones the flying of the flag. But then, as you mentioned, Advocate Tembeka Ngukaitobi did belabor the point of hate speech and the symbolism behind how the flag itself was created and what it meant. And I want us to look at it within the current context, because our Bill of Rights enshrines in it freedom of speech and expression, which what many of those who defend the flying of the flag has used to justify it. And I want you to look at global trends. Europe has been shifting ideologically to the right under the guise of nationalism. And AfriForum is one of those organizations that talk about protecting Africana nationalism and heritage. So let's look at it from that prism and understand how this argument plays out in present day South Africa.
No, I hear that. And for me, that is all just, that is deception, right? That's legal deception. And it is all obfuscation. Here is the issue, right? We must make a distinction between what is legal and what is just, right? Racism, slavery, apartheid were legal, right? But they were not necessarily just. So that's the first point. The second point here is that what is happening here is that if you just take an example of, let's make an example of Germany, right? With what has happened to the Jews in Germany, right? So enshrined in their legislation in Germany is that if you were to display or promote any symbols, right, that in any way glorify or justify, right, the types of atrocities that were committed during the period of Nazi Germany, those would be declared not just criminal acts, but they would be severely punished, right? So it is still possible that within your legal framework, even if you want to be universal, it's also important that you become contextual to your own history. And so my point is, we have a unique history in which Europeans committed genocide in this country. And the flag in question, right, is a symbol of that genocide. And this is why I'm saying to just reduce it to legality and the Bill of Rights, is to miss the point, because we must also understand the context or the circumstances under which the Bill of Rights was created. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution are a product of a negotiated settlement, right? And even in that negotiated settlement, we accept that the original crime of genocide and invasion by the Europeans, as represented by people like AfriForum, has not been addressed. So it is disingenuous, in my view, to want to squarely just reduce this to what the Bill of Rights say and what the law says, because that is exactly part of the problem, that we must face and call this thing what this is. This is purely white arrogance and just a naked display of white supremacy.
Advocate Ngugai Tobi emphasizing the fact that the flag itself is not just a piece of cloth, but it is a living thing, and that there is nothing as powerful and unifying as a national flag. And imagine this is what the new era in terms of democratic South Africa was seeking to do by not only coining the phrase, the Rainbow Nation, celebrating our diversity, but emphasizing the huge need to unify. And that's why there was a new flag. Let's talk about the design then. What should be emblematic of a South Africa today? Because if there's meaning in a flag, the apartheid flag, when it was envisaged in 1926, what was the intention behind that, and juxtapose that to what we have that now?
No, absolutely. So if you think of our revolutionary icons, right? People like Muzuwake Lembede, people like Mangaliso Sobukwe, people like Chris Hani, people like Umama Matikizela Mandela. If you think of all of them, right, everything that they stood for, everything that they fought against, everything that they were made to suffer for, right, is embodied in symbols like the flag that AfriForum is saying must be promoted, right? So it is important for us to understand that that is not just a symbol for us. For the natives, in South Africa, that flag also represents the many people who were killed. It also represents the many people who still remain unaccounted for. And so in terms of what it represents, it represents the perpetuation of our humiliation as the natives. And if we are to have a situation where we as the natives, like all other native people across the world, right, are able to exercise our rights and our dignity in the land of our ancestors, we must have national symbols that are a reflection of the native people. And it is not an anomaly. All sensible and justice-loving people understand that in any territory, it is the symbols, the rules, the laws of the natives, right, that define the character of a nation or a society. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But you see, and this is exactly what we don't want to understand and accept, that even in building a united South Africa, right, it can't be a united South Africa that continues to perpetuate the value system of the Europeans at the expense of the natives, And I don't have to state the obvious, right? We are a majority as Africans in this country, like numerically, but culturally, economically, and otherwise, we are a minority. And organizations like AfriForum want to maintain that status quo.
I want to also reflect on the fact that we have seen the old apartheid flag pop up in other parts of the world as a symbol of white supremacy. And when it was envisioned, this unionization of South Africa, the past version had the flag of the Netherlands combined with other miniature flags representing different colonies that came together to form South Africa. What is the importance of this? Because, and I want to juxtapose the fact that I believe that South Africa, our flag, is the only flag that has 6 colors as a national flag. The importance of these symbolisms, the thinking behind them, how people use them to express their identity politics and also aspirations.
Yes, and it is important that you make that point. It's also important to understand, when the Union of South Africa was declared, incidentally, it was declared on this month, right, in 1910. It was through an act of the British Parliament that the name South Africa was conceived. As the natives, we did not even conceive of that name. It is a name that was imposed on us through violence by the British Parliament, an act that was passed in 1909, September 1909. And subsequent to that, all the symbols that followed from 1910 coming this way embodied that type of imperialist logic, right? And that is what that flag and related symbols like the stem, etc., and the statues of people like Rhodes and other people represent. That's what they represent. Now, an attempt was made, right, by some of our leaders to say, notwithstanding that history, as grotesque as it is, we must make an attempt, right, to still try and construct a new country, a new society, a new nation. And this is what the attempt was, with the current flag that we have, that we still bend over 360 degrees as the natives to accommodate the very people who continue to be unapologetic about their domination and the fact that they treat us with disdain. But where has this landed us, right, 28 years later? In March this year, the World Bank published a report, right, that graphically helps us understand the situation we are in which report the World Bank states over 80% of the financial assets in South Africa are in the hands of less than 10%. But that report even went further as to say that the nature of economic relations in South Africa continue to reflect the colonial architecture, right? Now, what question does that force us to ask? It forces us to ask the question, the project that was inaugurated in 1994 that sought to construct an open, just, and democratic society, has that project succeeded, right? And do organizations like AfriForum recognize the magnanimity, right, of the leadership of this country at this time to still bend over backwards to accommodate people like AfriForum, right? And obviously, they don't recognize that, and this is why they are continuing. Right. So for me, it is important that we juxtapose the symbols also with the material reality, the lived experience of the native people in this country.
Veli, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Much, much appreciated. Veli Mbele kaSompisi, he's an Afrocentric essayist and co-founder of Mutapa, a think tank that focuses on Afrocentric dialogue and teaching of authentic history.